mission of the City of Santa Barbara Water Commission to order. It is, I can't talk this morning, but that's okay. Roll call. It looks like all commissioners are present. Any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the agenda.
Okay. We don't have any public today, so keep on going with that one. Consent items. Questions? So it's just the approval of the meeting minutes.
Move approval, or second,
Second, whatever.
or move.
You want to be on the
Michael Jordan is going to, will take his motion since he's only with us for a couple more meetings, and
Second.
Commissioners Davis is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. Motion carries. Thank you. Summary of adopted water rights order, state water rights order.
Chair Bernie, Commissioners, as requested, we're here today to just give you a summary of the recent adoption of the State Water Rights Order. Our Deputy City Attorney, Mr. Henske, is here, and he's going to walk you through that today.
Our Honorable Chair, members of the Commission, I'm Dan Hinchke, the Assistant City Attorney.
Did I promote you or demote you?
You demoted.
Oh, sorry.
You promoted me at the federal level. You demoted me at the state level.
Okay.
What I'm going to talk to you today very briefly about is the State Board Water Rights Order for the operation of the Cachuma Reservoir that was issued earlier this year. And so I'm not going to be making a very technical presentation. A link to the order was included within the materials that you got in your packet. If you happen to open that link, you discovered it was a very lengthy, more than 100-page document that went into great detail about all the various elements of the operation of the reservoir and addressing a lot of the environmental and operational concerns. So, what do we have here? Well, after nearly 20 years of effort, we have a new state board order for the operation of the Cachuma Reservoir. The permitting effort involved the Bureau of Reclamation, which is essentially the owner of the project, the Cachuma member units, the Cachuma users, which includes the city, ID1, Goleta Water District, Montecito Water District, and Carpinteria. We're the consumers of the water that's stored in the reservoir. The various environmental regulatory agencies and the downstream users. And one of the things that's important to keep in mind here is that in the operation of a on-stream storage reservoir, there are a lot of different interests that have to be balanced in order to operate that reservoir. One of the primary interests is the interest of the prior right holders, which we call the downstream users. In this case, it's primarily the Santa Ynez Water Conservation District, which we often refer to as the parent district, and the city of Lompoc, who have water rights that pre-exist the construction of the Bradbury Dam. Water that gets stored in the reservoir is water that is excess of the needs of the downstream users. So what is another downstream user that's we have to protect? Well, the public trust interest, which is the reserved interest of the state to protect public trust resources, which in this case includes an endangered species. I'm going to call them steelhead trout. There's a technical name for it. I'm sure Joshua remembers exactly what that technical name is. Yeah, Mike is something. Yeah. Anyway, so after years of hearings, environmental documents, a state board proceeding, which is a quasi-adjudicatory proceeding, the state board issued its permit on September 17th. On October 16th, the Bureau of Reclamation filed a petition for reconsideration. Nobody else filed any action, any motion for reconsideration. The petition for reconsideration raised two essentially limited federal technical issues. One was related to a requirement of the permit for reclamation to study the feasibility of fish passage around Bradbury Dam. Fish passage around Bradbury Dam has been a controversial issue for years. It's essentially physically impossible to do with any kind of construction. It's basically would have to be capture and lift. But the technical reason that the Bureau stated is that they're not legally authorized by Congress to conduct feasibility studies, and feasibility studies have a specific meaning under federal law, and they can't do it, so that should be taken out. The other is a concern about inclusion in the state board order of a 2013 biological assessment and a draft biological opinion as a source of information. And the key issue there is that neither of those documents have been finally adopted and are not haven't gone through the rigorous process for approval. As we've talked, I think we've talked with you about before, the Bureau of Reclamation has actually submitted a new proposed project and a new biological assessment to the National Marine Fisheries Services in order to get a new biological opinion. So the concern is that reliance by the state board on this information is not only improper as a matter of law, but it's also improper as a matter of good science. You don't want to use something that's really outdated and refer to it as the best available scientific information. There are scientists who disagree that it's the best available scientific information. So the board has until September 16th to act on the petition. Don't know what they're going to do. They may just not do anything. In that case, the time period within which the Bureau could file a challenge would start running. So let's talk about the operation of Cachuma very briefly. By way of background, the Cachuma Reservoir is operated and has been operated under kind of an existing permit regime as we were going through this 20-year process of getting a new permit. And essentially, we've been operating under a 2000 biological opinion. The dam releases under the existing flow regime calls for water right releases to protect the interests that I talked about before, which are the downstream senior water rights and also fish releases that are necessary to maintain the species according to a particular flow regime. The amount of water that's released is based upon the amount of water that's stored in the reservoir and whether the reservoir is spilling, which it does or has done occasionally in the past, may or may not ever do in the future, don't know. This is why water is so much fun. It's like we have all these assumptions and speculations, and then it rains, or not. In a number of the documents, you'll see reference to various options. These relate to the options that are set forth in the environmental impact report that was certified for the state board order. The existing operating regime has been referred to as option 3C. The option 3C was what the Cachuma member units and the downstream interests have been lobbying for, if you will, arguing for, litigating for, however you want to phrase it, during the course of the proceedings. We all wanted to maintain option 3C. That's not what happened. What we got was a new order that essentially adopts what they called option 5C. And option 5C divides the water releases, particularly for downstream, into water year classifications. And the classifications are below normal, normal, dry, critically dry, and dry. And in the above normal and wet years, which are part of the classifications, additional water volumes are released in order to protect the interests, the public trust interests, which translate to steelhead. So that was what they were trying to do. The releases in the above normal water years, and that would also include the wet, have to be sufficient to sustain target flows at two specific measuring points that are downstream of Bradbury Dam. The amounts are specified in the order, but basically the idea here is that during the periods of above normal rainfall and wet years, more water gets released than would otherwise be released under the existing operating scenario. And why? Why? They attempt to balance the public trust interests with the water supply needs, and the theory is when you're releasing more water in the wet years, as best as I can understand it, and Joshua, as our water engineer, could probably explain it a lot better. I'll explain it like a lawyer. The theory is that because the people don't need the water because it's raining really hard, we're going to give it to the fish so that they can establish all the needs that they have in terms of living in the water instead of drinking the water. And during the wet years and above wet years, there's more water available to serve the public trust needs. Now, there is a water supply impact of that I'm going to be getting to in a minute. But that's kind of, I think, the reasoning why they were doing that. So this is the basis of the new order, which I mentioned before was option 5C. And they do a look ahead to a hydrological record based upon water year classifications, as I mentioned before, wet, above normal, below normal, dry, and critical. And what you'll notice is that the water year classification is based upon inflow into Cachuma. In other words, the amount of water that's fallen on the ground upstream of Cachuma flows into the reservoir, and that amount will tell you what kind of year that is going to be. And it's measured, as I recall, October to October is the water year. That's I've had that explained to me a number of times, and it gets very difficult and very complicated. But basically, the idea is to capture the rainfall cycle and the dry cycle within California's climate as a statewide basis. So that's the basis of the order. The flow regime changes, and Commissioner Jordan, or should I say almost future Commissioner Jordan, these are the purposes of the releases during the various time periods, and as you can see, there's different amounts that are released in the above normal and wet years for different purposes, and that's what they are. Our fish biologists participated in the hearing. They have some different views as to whether or not this is going to be an effective means of protecting and encouraging, but there are differing viewpoints on this, and so the state board came up with this particular flow regime in order to protect the fish. Okay?
And is this per day? per
It's,
cubic feet per
it's,
second.
it's,
That's
it's
what. Okay.
done in
Got it.
CFS, and it's done during those particular release periods for those particular purposes. And so, if you go backwards, if you've got that let's say a wet year where you've had greater than 117,000 acre feet of water inflowing into Kachuma, then the releases during these particular points of the month are based upon that CFS, and it's for those purposes.
So
And I'll let Joshua answer what this is all about.
so one CFS is about 10,000 gallons a day. To kind of put that, so 50,000 gallons a day would be kind of the minimum flow releases in that case, just to kind of quantify the volume here.
Do we know what it sums up to in a year? How many acre feet?
Well,
I mean,
I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get to that a little bit. Yeah, they can do the calculations. I don't have that on my chart, but I do have the impact of the total order as modeled by our expert water flow
it's
modelers.
an easy calculation, but
Yeah,
I can't do it.
yeah.
off the top of my head.
If I would have done math, I would have been a doctor.
A couple more questions.
Okay, so
Just a second. We got a
Dan,
couple
well,
more questions. Hang
yeah,
on.
Just, and this is trivia, but in terms of the measurement, is that a dynamic measurement over the year, or do you basically measure at one point in time and then that regiment goes into effect for the next year? How's the measurement at the bridge versus the release of the water versus is it a dynamic thing over the year, or is it a 1 year average, which then, not average, but measurement, which then moves? Do you know?
I don't know, Joshua. Do you know? If we don't know, we'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, I mean, again, is it leading, static, or lagging?
I understand what you're saying.
so the critical, well, whatever the year is determined, kind of sets this up, and then it would be that
The following year, so
yeah.
it's a lagging
Yeah.
release. Yeah, okay.
Right.
Good, thanks.
Thanks, Joshua. So we try to estimate the impacts of this regime versus the existing flow regime under 3C. And the impacts that we averaged over the entire period of the 70-year look forward was about 200 acre feet a year average over the whole period. Now, what does this mean in potential operational reality? Well, because you're releasing more water in the above and normal and wet years, you're potentially creating a situation where you're drawing down the reservoir more than you otherwise would. Under existing operations, it stays in the reservoir and can get carried over for other purposes from year to year, and you just have more water in the reservoir. Well, now that water gets released, and there's a potential impact related to if you have a wet year with a lot of releases followed by some dry years, how does that get refilled and how does that get carried over a period of time? And so that's going to be the critical issue as we're moving forward. The State Board order does keep itself open for adjustments if necessary, and the main provisions, however, keep it open for adjustments to protect fish. But the reality is that if we need to reopen in order to protect people and drinking, we can do that as well. You go in and you petition to amend the permit. So this is basically just a summary sheet of what we've been talking about, what I've been talking about. The board order requires higher flows during a period of greater rainfall to improve fish flows. The water supply impacts are going to be the greatest in dry and critical years that follow above normal water years, and that's the above normal and wet years, those 2 years. One of the things that we're going to have to address as a city, the Kachuma member units, and as the Water Commission, is how are you going to balance your entire water supply portfolio with this new flow regime? And one of the things that the state board order talks about is that the impacts associated with what they know might be supply impacts to the consumers is the availability of other water sources, which would include groundwater. Desalination is specifically mentioned in the state board order. One of the concerns that the city had was the inference that the desalination plant could be used for other purposes. That's our water supply. We own it. It's the city's decision whether or not that gets used for solely Santa Barbara purposes, for regional purposes under contract with others. How that gets used is our within our control. Same thing with our One Water and other products. Those are our water supply resources, and so those are going to have to be evaluated by us as we move forward. So that's going to be a work bill that is going to have to come back to the commission and the council over time. But that's a traditional public trust type analysis. There's not a whole lot of legal basis to argue over it. They recognized at the state board hearing, and we objected to the inclusion of the reference. They recognized at the state board hearing that the state board does not have any direct control or permitting authority over that water supply. But that said, it is something that gets taken into consideration when evaluating public trust interests. And a prime example of that is the Audubon case that dealt with Mona Lake and the need to keep Mona Lake full to more water in Mona Lake, which meant less water to Los Angeles, and they had to make up for that loss by other sources and including conservation and other water supply activities in the city. That's a traditional public trust analysis, and that's what the board did. With regard to this, in the course of what I'm going to call litigation, we do have a JPA that's been organized to protect water rights in Kachuma and downstream of Kachuma, and that's the Kachuma Conservation Release Board. Councilmember Snedden is the city's designated representative to that JPA. The other members of the JPA are the Goleta Water District and the Montecito Water District. It has a different purpose than COMB. The Kachuma Operation and Maintenance Board is essentially formed for operational purposes. CCRB, which represented us collectively in the state board proceedings on the permit, essentially acts as a legal, as a means by which we combine and cost share our legal representation of the state board. And we've been active as the city through CCRB throughout this process, and will continue to be active as the biological assessment and the proposed action go through the state, the NIMS, to get a new buyout for the operation. That's my report.
For the new buyout, do we know how much it would change this requirement? I mean, would it be a significant increase or not significant? What do we think?
That don't know at this point, and so because it's in the process, really can't comment on what the impact would be and how that would play forward. What we do know is that we will be actively monitoring that process as it goes through.
Mr. Davis.
First thing, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Joshua, for bringing this. I think it's been something which I've been interested in for a while. Go back. You talked about the average impact of about 200 acre feet a year. Could you explain that a little bit better?
Sure.
Best you can at this point, yeah.
Yeah. What we did was we modeled the anticipated changes in the flow regime between what we have now and the under the expected over of 5C over the next 70 years, and then did a math calculation by computer and came up with an average annual impact of 200. So, I mean, and then this is the point I was trying to make. Over the whole period, it's a small impact
Yeah.
on a yearly basis. What that impact is going to be on a specific year
Yeah,
between if a wet and a dry and a dry and a dry, we don't know because we can't predict how that would happen, and we didn't do a Monte Carlo simulation of what would happen on all these various things. We just did an average.
And it does not take into consideration climate change.
Right.
So it's kind of
I was going to say, the whole climate change issue and, the evaporation issues you're going to have, the siltation of the lake, you put all those factors in there, and then you lay a new biop opinion on top of that, and we got a serious equation.
Which is why I mentioned that we're going to have a significant work effort related to how we manage our entire water supply portfolio that'll be coming up when you do your
Long-term water supply plan.
your new planning effort.
Good. Again, thank you, Dan, for bringing this to us.
Any other questions, Commissioner
I
Jordan?
just have one question. So on the media release, there's a throwaway paragraph about if the anticipated benefit isn't reached, they'll reduce the flows. Is there a timeline on that, or what does that really mean?
That is a kind of a standard. We reserve jurisdiction to change our minds if necessary in the future, and it means exactly what it says.
Interesting, though, is it doesn't say if it doesn't do any good, it says we'll reduce the flows. It doesn't say we'll increase the flows.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of odd.
There's discretion reserved to the director and to the deputy director with regard to modification of the permit requirements as necessary. How that happens, we don't really know. We think because it would affect water rights and affect our contract rights to water, we would have to have a legal process that would allow us due process and the ability to comment and the ability to argue against any of the future changes. The condition is kind of a standard type condition that the state board includes in a lot of orders where they reserve their right to change things as circumstances change in the future because that's what their job is.
Right. But in this particular case,
Yeah.
the actual, which isn't in the order, it's just some guy writing,
Exactly.
PIO writing something to make you feel better about taking your water away, right? There's no actual thing in the order that says in 5 years or 10
No.
years, we'll review the fish counts, the
No.
spawning, and if this isn't working, we'll give you your water back.
No.
Okay, all right,
No.
thanks.
I've got a similar question. What does success look like? I mean, we're talking about 100 fish, which is an abysmal number, but are we trying to get 200 fish? Are we trying to get 1,000 fish? Do we know what success looks like for this?
I don't.
It's a fantastic question, and I don't think there is a vision that has at least been shared with us about what success looks like. They're just telling us that they're not happy with it as it stands now. And I think, unfortunately, the state water rights order falls short of addressing some of the issues we've seen and noted, which is the invasive species that continue to propagate downstream and feed on any steelhead that are able to make it up, and that's kind of really part of the challenge. And when we continue to dump more water down there, that water tends to be environments that allow for thriving of bass and other predatory fish. So it falls short of that. I don't know if the biological opinion will actually address that. It would be nice to see some recognition that we need to deal with invasive species in the San Ynez River watershedd.
Madam Chair, that was one of my other questions. That was, they didn't speak to that at all? Because I know that NOAA has a steelhead recovery plan, quote unquote, that I don't know if they've adopted it, but I know that they've developed it and put it out publicly. And in there, they speak a lot of dealing with those kind of issues. I would be surprised if, in fact, it didn't raise itself within this order, since the goal is to increase the steelhead production. But they didn't, huh? Not that you know.
Well, when you read through the entire order of the resolution, they addressed a number of issues and they gave answers to some of the various impacts. But at the end of the day, they had to make an order related to the operation of the reservoir, and that's really what it does. It did not say, and if we don't meet this threshold, we're going to do this. It doesn't do any of that. I think to a large extent, this has been going on for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
There was a kind of a push to get done and to be done with the process. And so they issued an order that they think will work for in their judgment for everybody. That's what all the findings and all that in the order are. And then we'll have to see what happens in the future. Much like the operation of any water system, you can have very good professional estimates, but do we know what's going to happen as a result of climate change?
Right. And on the recovery plan, and this is really for staff, NOAA did go through this, releasing the recovery plan for the San Ynez River, which would address the question as to what success looked like. And I'm just curious as to whether that was part of the analysis which is there and/or the input which was given. Again, and trying to get to the question of what's the goal? Where are we going? Okay, good answer.
Dan, thank you so much. Councilmember Seddon, anything to add?
Yes, I'm internally being very careful here because so much of these CCRB discussions are closed session, but I do want to emphasize that as a entity together that CCRB has hired, we have our own, on behalf of the city and the other member agencies involved, attorneys and biologists and hydrogeologists, and I just want to assure you they've done very, very thorough and with the benefit of the fish in mind, flow regimes that are also being pitched. So it's to take into account all of these real issues of whether the impacts are actually beneficial to the fish or not, recognizing the flashy hydrology and that it's been a different regime that's actually beneficial to the fish. So just to assure you that that's being very well vetted and accounted for, at least within CCRB, and hopefully that will carry forward.
Thank you very much.
And we do hope this will be kind of the first step. I know Councilmember Sneddon's been really pushing at CCRB to be more transparent on a lot of these issues because, unfortunately, in the absence of information, people can come to the wrong conclusions. I think all of us are pushing hard in defense of the fish, trying to help the species recover, and I think there's a lot that can be done. I think, unfortunately, a lot of it comes to the answer is just to dump more water, and I think we've developed enough information to say that is a component, but it is not the whole story of how you get this species to come back. In particular, how do you do it in a climate that's also changing? And so I think we're challenged with that, and I think one of the things that we're working on is how do we message that, because I do think that we are pro-fish. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Not seeing any other questions. We appreciate your time today, Dan. Next, we've got our water supply status update. Dakota Corey, please. It's good timing right after this.
Commissioner Burney, council members, or water commissioners, and council member. we're here, and this is part of our twice-a-year update on our water supply status. We do this in November and May, and so we're eager to kind of walk you through where we are. And it's nice to have taken a break from those monthly updates, but we do have a lot to share with you today and seek your input on. So I'll let Dakota take that away.
Commissioners. Good morning, Chair Burney and Commissioners. I'm Dakota Corey. I'm the water supply analyst for the city. And today I want to provide a status update on our water supplies. Where are we at right now and where are we going in the next few years? So a brief summary of my presentation. We'll talk really quickly about how we used our water supplies in water year 2019, which just ended in September 2019. So we're moving now into water year 2020. I will be back in December with a presentation of our annual water supply management report. And that's a backwards-looking document that gives really great detail on how we used our water in water year 2019. So today's update on that will be pretty brief. And then we'll move into the status of each of our individual water supplies, where we stand right now. From there, we'll take a look ahead 3 years. Where do we see ourselves with water supply moving forward? And then finally, I want to provide a brief update on our Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan, formerly known as our Long-Term Water Supply Plan. Okay, so first, when we're thinking about how we used our water in water year 2019. Again, that was September 2018 through October 2019. The first thing to consider in Southern California is always precipitation. So this is a graph provided by the county that looks back to 1980. The red dashed line about 1/3 of the way up from the graph is the average rainfall. And then each of the bars represent the percentage of average. So you can see in 2019 that we had an above average precipitation year with 128% rainfall. But then if you look back a few years, as you guys know, we've had some very dry years. Besides 2017, we've had an unprecedented drought. So that kind of sets the stage for how we use our water supplies here at the city. And this slide just provides rainfall at a couple of locations that are important to the city. So at Gibraltar Reservoir for water year 2019, we saw rainfall that was 133% of normal. At Cachuma, it was 136% of normal. And in Santa Barbara, it was 141% of normal. Pretty good year. This graph here shows how we plan to use our water supply sources versus how we actually used them. And the biggest takeaway, so the bar on the left is our planned, and then the bar on the right is our actual usage. The biggest takeaway is that Gibraltar filled and spilled in January 2019. And so that gave us a source of water that we didn't anticipate having going into the water year. So we actually used 20 times more Gibraltar water than we had planned. And what that allowed us to do was then, so Gibraltar is represented by kind of the gray-blue square. And what that allowed us to do was then leave a lot more Cachuma water in the lake, represented by the blue bar. And so we currently have storage in Cachuma of our Cachuma water over 22,000 acre feet. As you know, we've been resting our groundwater basins. We pumped them pretty heavily a couple years ago during our critical dry years, and we want to rest them so that they can recover. Desal's been a big help in allowing us to rest those groundwater basins. We had full production for water year 2019 as we anticipated. And then I do want to point your attention also to the red square, which is our conservation. And our customers have continued to conserve at a rate of 30% of pre-drought or 2013 demands. And that's been critical for allowing us to recover in the drought. So we'll dig a little bit deeper into those demands and that conservation. I want to point your attention to the red line and the blue line on this graph. The blue line is our drought target, so that's where we assumed 30% conservation from pre-drought demands. And then the red line is our actuals, and you can see that they track very closely. So what that means is that our customers have done a fantastic job meeting our conservation targets. And you can see in text there that our 12-month running average conservation is 31%. I do want to point your attention to the point on the far right of the graph above October 2019. And you'll see that we also met our target in October for that month. However, if you look at the text at the top of the graph, you can see that we had only a 20% reduction for the month of October. And so the reason I want to point that out is I'm actually redoing the targets for water year 2020. Now that we're in a stage 1 water supply condition, we do expect our demands to start to rebound a little bit, and we want to anticipate that. So we're anticipating that our demands will be more of a 20% pre-drought conservation versus 30. So moving forward, that will be our target. Okay, so how are each of our water supplies doing? First, we'll talk about Gibraltar Reservoir. We currently have about 33% of our total capacity stored at Gibraltar, or 1,400 acre-feet. We are continuing to divert from Gibraltar. The water quality is getting worse, as it does this time of year, so we're seeing increased turbidity and organics. However, it's not all that bad yet, and we're able to blend it with some of our other sources at Cater and produce still high-quality drinking water. So we're going to continue to bring that water down from Gibraltar until we reach about 1,000 acre-feet of storage, or until the water quality gets such that we can't use it anymore. And as we saw in that graph previously, this has been a really important source for us this year. As we talked about earlier, we have a lot of water stored in Cachuma. The reservoir is full, or is about 72% full right now from total capacity at just under 140,000 acre-feet. And of that water in the lake, 22,240 acre-feet of it is allocated to the city. And because we just started the new water year in October, we were given our next year's allocation for Cachuma water in the lake. So our allocation is 8,277 acre-feet. We received 100% allocation, so that's included in that 22,000 acre-feet. This is just a graphical representation of the water stored in Cachuma, and you can see the black line was a historic drought from 1986 to 1993, and then the green line starts in 2011, which is the last time that Cachuma Reservoir spilled, and tracks through present time. And what I actually had to do, you can look at year 8 and 9 of the drought, so that means 8 or 9 years after Cachuma spilled. I extrapolated out the drawdown on Cachuma based on historical. Yeah, right in there.
And this.
Because we still haven't spilled yet, so we're still technically in a drought, and we want to kind of understand what is drawdown going to look like from where we're at now. So that's just to give us a better visual there. In terms of our imported state water, we have a 75% allocation of our Table A amount, so that gives us 2,475 acre-feet. Currently, I believe you guys are aware that we aren't able to deliver state water to Lake Cachuma. CCWA, or the Central Coast Water Authority, is working on building a bypass that will pump the water up and over the dam and allow us to get it back into the lake. They were waiting for materials, and they also had a big shutdown, which is a big workload issue for them. And the shutdown is finished, and I believe the materials are in or coming in, and so they hope to get that project finished by the end of the calendar year. We do still have some water debt on the state water project. It's about 5,000 acre-feet. We've paid back at least 1,200 acre-feet of that water debt, and we'll continue to do so as long as we feel comfortable that we have enough supplies and storage to meet our own needs here at the city. And then finally, yes?
Quick question. So is it possible to store water in the Santa Ynez Valley in terms of storing it in groundwater and then do some exchange with them, or some trading that could be done?
Not currently. In fact, CCWA is actually doing a study right now on what the groundwater banking opportunities are from the State Water Project turnout near Kettleman City all the way down to Cachuma. So they're looking at what banking opportunities. I think there's a lot of promise and hope that we can find some banking opportunities in between the State Water Project pipeline and Colonial Pass, the treatment plant, for CCWA treatment plant. So there's a segment in there that would be actually pretty ideal if we could find some storage in there. But right now that's a study that's underway.
And just one last thing I wanted to mention about our state water. We are still working on contract reassignment. So currently the County of Santa Barbara is our water supply contract holder for our state water project water. We've been working through CCWA to reassign that contract to CCWA. And there's going to be a Board of Supervisors meeting on February 4th. And the goal of that meeting is to work out any last minute issues in the draft agreement so that all parties can agree to move forward. And then if that meeting goes well, they expect to have a second meeting to adopt the agreement to reassign the contract sometime after that, after February. All right, so for groundwater, as we've mentioned before, we are resting the basins, so we haven't been pumping our groundwater basins. We do continue to monitor seawater intrusion in our storage unit 1 and water levels in both storage unit 1 and Foothill on a monthly basis. We expect full recovery of the basin to take up to 5-10 years based on our previous observations in the last drought. Our desal plant continues to operate in full production. For water year 2019, we ended up with, I think it's 2,993 acre feet, so 95% of the anticipated production amount of 3,125 acre feet. Desal continues to play an important role in drought recovery because we have this consistent, reliable source of water. We're allowed to let our groundwater basins rest and recover. And finally, recycled water plant is currently online and it's meeting our customer demands. We just finished a series of repairs and fixes to increase the capacity of the recycled water plant, and staff is actually currently load testing the plant to see what the new capacity may be after these repairs. So we hope to have more information on that soon.
We expect probably in early 2020 that we'll have that. We want to do probably at least 2 months of stress testing, and we're doing different capacities or different flow rates and obviously different types of cleanings to kind of optimize that. But hopefully at the end of this, we'll have a upper number of what we think the facility is available, and then what capacity may be available for sale if we want to go that route.
All right, so next we'll move on to the water supply outlook. As you know, at the beginning of the water year, we always assess our water supplies and we take a 3-year outlook. And the idea with this assessment is that we're looking for a feasible worst case scenario. So we had a pretty good wet year last year, but what if we go right back into dry years, 3 consecutive dry years? So this is a conservative planning effort, and the idea is if we were to encounter 3 more years of drought, would we have enough supplies to meet demands for our community? And so some of the assumptions that went into this planning effort include little to no precipitation, which would result in no additional inflows to both Cachuma and Gibraltar reservoirs. And so what that means in terms of the water available on Cachuma is for water year 2020, we already know we have 100% allocation, so that's in our planning. And then for water year 2021, we'd anticipate the lake to start drawing down, so we'd expect to use less of our Cachuma water, and I assumed an 80% allocation for water year 2021. And then for water year 2022, continuing along that path, we'd think of 40% Cachuma allocation. Similarly, I assumed a 35% water allocation on the state water project, so assuming that it's kind of dry statewide and we get a lower allocation there. We would expect our desal plant to be in full production and reliable, and so it's still a little conservative. There's a little padding built in there, but we assume 240 acre feet per month out of the desal plant. I think we did better than that this year by a couple hundred acre feet. And then, as we discussed earlier, assuming conservation at that 20% level versus the 30% that we've been seeing.
When does that pre-drought baseline ever move down? So we start out somewhere, we're where we are now after a wet year. You make the point in the staff report that if we have a couple of wet years, we never go back up to pre-drought demand. Do we then, at what point do we bring that line down for the new pre-drought number to start measuring conservation off again?
So that's one of the questions that we hope to answer as we work on the enhanced urban water management plan. We have done some work with some consultants to evaluate what we think the rebound's going to look like, and their efforts suggest that we won't ever return to pre-drought demands. We think it'll be 10% less of pre-drought demands, and that recovery period is probably about 7 years, so we'll kind of slowly creep back up to that 10% less period. And then we'll take what we've done with them moving forward into the long-term water supply plan and, define a new normal.
And so when you do that new normal, then that 20% will erode down a little, right, to 15%, and then we'll work on increasing the conservation level back up off the new pre-drought number, right, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense?
It's tricky with conservation, and especially in our community because they're so fantastic at conserving. At some point, there's demand hardening, and there's not much more water you can squeeze out. In terms of conservation,
Could be actually that way in the future as all the easy pickings and the lawns disappear.
Exactly.
You end up with less potential out there to try and maintain the same conservation level, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so at some point, whenever, if the world continues the way it is, those two lines come back together, and then we got some real hard issues again on how to conserve off of the new reality, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay, so what does that look like? This graph you've seen before, and on the left-hand side, we start in 2013 through 2019. Those are actuals, so how did we actually meet our demands in those years? And then we also look out 3 years for water year 2020 through water year 2022. And what this shows us is that we do have plenty of water supplies to meet demands through water year 2022, even with that conservative sort of we go right back into the drought planning. And so you can see that our primary water source in the next 3 years would be Cachuma. We do have a lot of water stored in Cachuma. We would rely on desal at its full production. And then in water years 2021 and 2022, we'd also be looking at using some state water and just a little bit of groundwater. That would be in like peak summer months when we're just trying to meet peak demand. And we'd only be pumping storage unit number 1, which tends to recover more quickly in terms of water levels than Foothill Basin.
Also want to know there, so we've got the adjusted conservation now, and here it goes from the 30 to 20%.
Yeah.
And you may notice that the desal bar in 2020 is smaller, and there's a purpose behind that. As you may recall, there was issues with the transition fittings. We reached a settlement agreement with IDE, and so that work is being scheduled for the spring. And so we have a planned outage, which we've kind of padded for the facility to be down when they're redoing those transition fittings, and then bring the facility back on. So.
Yep.
I got a question.
Yep.
So in this supply, are we projecting what we may be selling to, like, say, Montecito? Or?
That's my next slide.
Okay.
Thanks for the transition. So here is what our water supply outlook looks like. Should we approve the agreement, the water supply agreement with Montecito Water District to sell them excess supply that would come online in water year 2021. So you see that the bars do get taller in water years 2021 and 2022. And we do have plenty of excess supplies to meet their demands of 1,430 acre feet. And the mix looks pretty similar. We'd still be relying heavily on Cachuma and desal, a little bit more state water, and we'd still be using just a little bit of groundwater in the summer to meet peak demands.
So we did speak with the chair and vice chair about this and how to, and we're still working with this graphic of we do want to be clear as we move forward about what water the city, if this agreement were to be signed, what water the city then would have control over, which is how the city customers the water versus this water that we're now obligated to provide. But then again, this graphic here clearly shows all of the demands that the city has. So we're working on how best to portray that information and to have that conversation with the community as we move forward.
Yep.
Just a quick question. On 2022, the Cachuma allocation go up from what the previous graph or no? I couldn't tell. I don't remember.
There's a little bit more Cachuma water used in 2022 in this graph than in the other. Basically, what I did is I took the amount we needed to fulfill for the water supply agreement, the 14,030 acre feet, and I just started filling in that bucket with our various supplies. And typically, Cachuma is one of the first supply sources that we use to fill those buckets because it's relatively inexpensive and easy for us to use. And then I start filling in with things like state water, which have a higher cost.
Yeah,
So yeah, there is a little bit more Kachuma water there.
I recognize that, and I was just curious how that dealt with then your assumption as to the allocations from Kachuma.
The allocations remain the same in both graphs.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's-
my assumptions are the same.
No, thank you. That
Yeah.
answers the question.
And what doesn't show in this graph is how much of that is the allocation and how much of it's a carryover.
Right.
Because as we start to
We
get
have a
out
bunch-
into 2022, much of that water is carryover from prior years. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's correct. Okay, so our conclusions after going through this supply planning effort, as I said earlier, we do have sufficient supplies to meet demands through water year 2022. And some important things to consider is I didn't include desal expansion to meet those demands, and I also didn't include any supplemental purchases of the state water project. So we actually, should things get even worse than my worst case scenario planning, we're not totally stuck. We have some other options available to us, although we do know there's some lead time, of course, to expand desal. We also have sufficient excess supplies to meet demands of the water supply agreement with Montecito Water District, should it be approved. And then finally, we wanted to address just briefly the current Stage 1 water supply condition. We think that that remains appropriate because our groundwater basins still have a lot of recovery left. And so we'd like to keep that in place. And then after this next rainy season, we'll see where we stand, and we can revisit that in the spring of 2020 and see if it's still appropriate. So, yes, Arturo.
A couple of questions. The first one is, so where do you see Kachuma being at the end of those 3 years with your assumptions that, we get no more water and we're going to be drawing all this? How much would we have, roughly?
In terms of our
availability,
allocation,
yeah.
I believe that we were down to a couple thousand acre feet of Kachuma water and virtually no state water. So, again, this is a worst case scenario, and I did really kind of drive those sources down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second question had to do with, in terms of conservation, so now we're not in the stage 2, we're in stage 1. But do we still continue the conservation programs in terms of incentivizing people to continue to conserve lawns and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. All of our conservation programs are still in effect. And, those are always implemented based on the avoided cost. And so it's still cost effective for us to implement those programs. We've still got field staff going out and helping people figure out where they've got leaks. We still have rebates available, and those programs will continue.
I think one of the things we were challenged with as a commission as we got into this is conservation is a way of life here. That is normal. And what we had been, and when the drought started, is talking about enhanced conservation. And maybe as we go through this update to the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan, it's trying to clarify what that is that we're asking for the community. It's an effort above and beyond what we consider to be a way of life here, which is always being sensitive to your use of water, but then taking it to a whole nother level when we get into these long, prolonged drought periods.
Another question?
Could you answer for us, are the impacts of the potential impacts of the State Water Board order taken into account in these graphs, or at what point will they be?
So in these graphs, I assume that our allocation remains the same. So our base allocation on Kachuma is 8,277 acre feet. As we move forward with the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute, that's where we're going to start looking at the planning and the impacts of that water rights order.
Thank you.
If you have. Okay, so just a brief update on the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan. And the first thing I think we should address is, what is the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan? For lots of years, we've been referring to our long-term water supply plan. And as you know, that's our primary water supply planning document here in the city. And it was last updated in 2011 as the city was going through the general plan update and the EIR for that. And so we've moved to calling that planning effort the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan after advice from the city attorney's office. And there's a couple of really good reasons to do that. First of all, the Urban Water Management Planning Act and all of the legislation that surrounds it has becoming more and more restrictive. I don't know. Restrictive isn't maybe the word. Onerous. There's lots of more legislation regarding how we do urban water management plans, what we report in them, and what's required. And the Department of Water Resources really sees the urban water management plan as the supply planning document for agencies. So there's lots of agencies out there that probably wouldn't do this if they didn't have to. And we've been kind of ahead of the game with our long-term water supply plan. But moving forward, the state and sort of the community outside of water supply, so say like our community planning group, really looks at the urban water management plan as our water supply planning document. And so when they're updating the housing element in the general plan, it should point to a document, and it makes sense for it to point to the urban water management plan. Instead of having kind of these two documents, our urban plan always was more of a reporting exercise for us, and it just referred back to our long-term water supply plan. Another thing that's advantageous for us as we move forward in updating our water supply planning is there's a streamlined CEQA process associated with urban water management plans, since they are required by the state every 5 years, and that will just make it easier for us to do the planning process for the long-term water supply planning effort. So what that means is we still plan to have the exact same robust planning effort that we would have had when we were calling it the long-term water supply plan. It's still going to have a detailed stakeholder engagement process so that we make sure that our community understands where we want to move forward with our water supply planning. We're just going to call it the Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan. It will align with Urban Water Management Plan reporting deadlines, which are every 5 years, and sort of the packaged report at the end will definitely meet the requirements of the Urban Water Management Planning Act.
And I think it's our intent is that as needed, or approximately every 10 years, we would do this enhanced effort, and then there would be the one in between would just be more of a reporting effort. But it does streamline it, and I think kind of combines that, because usually our urban water management plan basically just kept referring to our long-term water.
Yeah.
So
exactly. So in terms of updates on where we stand with this, we did release an RFP to get help with our Enhanced Urban Water Management Plan in October, and we expect proposals due back on December 12th. We have interviews scheduled for our top proposers on January 8th, and then we hope to kick off the project in March 2019.
we would like to ask for members of the commission, at least one, to sit on the selection panel. We've been kind of kicking that around, and so the date for what's the
January 8th.
January.
Yeah.
So maybe at the next meeting we can find out who the commission would like to put forward for that. I think we can take up to two, but at least one.
Yeah.
I'd be interested. I'm not going to be here next meeting, so I might as well say.
Oh, okay. Great.
I am
And-
too. I am too, but, if there's one, I'll let, Dr. Keller do it, so.
Okay. Are you interested?
I would do it too, but however it shakes out.
Okay, let's talk about it at the next meeting.
Great. All right, and that actually concludes my presentation. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
I should have a couple comments back, I think, really to the last section, and Joshua's heard this from me before, but I'd be continued to be interested in those, in whatever process still discusses getting rid of that white section at the top of the bars and, having a new normal. Because what's really concerning, I think, to me in 10 or 15 years is what happens when you have to start conserving into today's demand, not yesterday's demand, which is still what we're showing at the top of those bars, and what will those look like, and can you plan for that? And the other one is just that do we ever discuss, or do you ever have a plan that use of groundwater is the last choice in the water supply, and if you don't if demand doesn't reach a part where you projected in the other ones, so you have an excess of, say, desal, are you getting rid of those yellow? Would you get rid of those yellow ones as the first one to go in your source for the subsequent years? And is that something we consciously do, or we care about, or
Yeah.
7 to 10 period while we're recovering?
Right. I think the way that we've approached the groundwater basins is eventually, hopefully they get back to a point where we can pull safe yield from them. So it's basically this: if we don't take it, we're basically losing it. It's either going out to the ocean or it's just the basin's no more room theoretically in the basin. So we want to take that safe yield off, and we're certainly not there. But in times of planning like this, we try to be conservative, and sometimes the last thing you plug in is kind of your groundwater to show that it's ready and available. But certainly if it does rain, and then we'll be back in May to have that discussion, you'd probably see us pushing groundwater out, the pumping of groundwater, and filling that in with locals. So that's kind of the balancing of the discussion, I think, at this point. And given our water debt, we're not really eager also to go out there and purchase that. So I'd prefer to, if we're smaller volumes, pull it from our groundwater than to go and purchase it at this point.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that's actually exactly how I did the supply plan, and it's really because we plan under that worst case scenario. But even if we get a little bit of rain, not turning on our groundwater wells would be kind of our first action. Yeah.
I just want to add a comment and appreciation really for the extreme conservative planning that we're always thinking of, that we're at the first day of the next drought, and I think it's really prudent. And to the point about the white bars on there also, I think since that has been historical use, I would hate to be in a position of demand going up to that level and we hadn't planned for it. So I think it's important at some level, whether it's white bars or not.
Yeah, I guess what always worries me about the white part is it's kind of like I look at that and it's like a not permission, but an option to intrude there again. But it really doesn't call out and scream at me that if you go into that white area, we have to go obtain it somewhere, right? It's more like I'm conserving off something that's still there, but that's not really true, right?
I share your concern with that messaging, but also to give appreciation to our community that they are making up that water supply with the conservation. So it remains, I think, a tricky question how to.
You guys are both hitting some of the points we talk about internally, and I think that's why we've opted to leave it for now until we finish this enhanced urban water management plan, which I think would be the document that we would reference as what is the new normal. So
because you're talking supply and demand, and you've got both on there, right? And through the long-term water supply plan, once you have a demand projection, then you can start using that rather than this.
Yeah. Because I do think I think we're unique in the sense that we were early to look at conservation as a supply, and I think input from the commission was to show it that way, because it really is. If not for that conservation, we'd have to be providing that, and so we really want to plug it on a regular basis that it's a really this is how it really comes together here. And so I don't want to lose track of that, because I think some communities kind of don't see conservation necessarily as a potential supply.
Dr. Keller.
Hey, thank you for this very nice presentation. I'm just thinking also in terms of the costs, and so it'd be good for us to know what's the cost, the unit cost for the different sources, and also for those where we can actually expand, like desal or reclaim. What would be the incremental cost if you actually had to do an expansion? What would that mean, so that we have a sense of where would we get that extra water if we had to?
Okay, we actually do track that information, and I have some graphs I could share with you.
Great.
And that will also be a huge factor as we go into the enhanced urban water management plan. We hope to evaluate our sources on a number of different parameters, cost obviously being one of them, reliability being another, environmental impact being another, and there might be others that come out of the public process, but that'll be a huge part of that planning effort.
I just had a quick question too about you mentioned briefly, like, you've got the supply. If we run short somewhere, let's say desal has to be an option in the future for additional water supply. We've got this, I want to say 1,400 acre feet debt with Montecito if that goes through. The way I understand it is they pay for the current desal installation, and then they pay their annual cost for the water. If it becomes a situation where we need future water supply in the future and we do need to expand desal, now that becomes just a city cost, right, solely?
Yeah, we can get
Or
into
supply for
that in more
us.
detail, but it's a little more complicated. That they'll have a percentage of the facility, so they'll pay a percentage of the costs of expansion.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dakota. We appreciate it. Next up, El Estero operations update. Following completion of the secondary aeration basin improvement project. That is a mouthful. Amanda, welcome.
Good morning. My name is Amanda Flessy. I'm the wastewater systems manager today, but during this project, I was your construction manager, and I've been your construction manager for El Estero for the past 10 years. I'm super excited to just provide this update. I don't know if you get updates after big major CIP projects come to completion, but I asked Josh if I can celebrate this project with you guys because it was very impactful and it's done a tremendous job, and I want to just kind of celebrate the team and everything that has been going on for the past 3 years. So today we'll just I'll briefly touch on the construction, the operations, and optimizing kind of the process. That's kind of what we're going through now, and share our SRF, our State Revolving Fund video, and kind of talk over that. We've shared that with you guys privately, but we're super proud of it, and so wanted to bring that to you.
Before you even get into presentation, I just got to say, you guys take the best pictures. Absolutely.
We do.
Best.
We have a secret weapon. One of our operators, that is a passion of his, and he takes pictures and does it kind of on the side. And I've asked him to bring in his camera and do a whole bunch of pictures for us.
He can make it look like a day spa. Isn't
Right?
that amazing?
He does. And I've put that in our presentation. I'm just like, oh, they're so pretty. So construction began in May of 2016, and it took almost 3 years to carefully go through the process because we still had to treat water while we were still going through this process. Construction was awarded to Stanek Constructors. They mostly do just wastewater treatment plants. That's usually what they do. And this is the second time they've been at our plant. They did the Headworks project and did very well with the Headworks project back in 2010. And the cost for this was roughly about $30 million, and this was all funded through the SRF loan.
I typically don't do plugs for contractors, but these folks have really been impressive. We had to work through a lot of complicated issues. We had to work side by side with our operators to keep the plant going, and really appreciated their work with us.
This was definitely a team project. By all means. The contractor, our construction manager, our designer, our support in construction, and our staff. So we could not have done that without any of our consultant services or our contractor. And so that's why I really wanted to emphasize the contractor is really important, that they know wastewater treatment plants intimately, and it's not just a general A contractor that does miscellaneous, but they specialize in wastewater treatment plants. Maybe? There we go. Okay. So the project goals were really to change our process. We went from carbonaceous mode to a nitrification, denitrification mode, and with that, we wanted to address some issues, distribute flow equally into all of our basins. That was kind of one of our hang-ups. We never could distribute flow equally. So the picture here is what we call our octopus. And so that helps us really close and monitor the gate so it can be distributed equally and provide equal flow throughout all 6 basins. We also had to upgrade a lot of our existing equipment because our equipment is old and failing, or it's just no longer efficient and or obtainable. We had to buy a lot of our parts in eBay and really just try to hold things together. So we also wanted to provide redundancy in areas that we were lacking and was kind of at risk. This project also addressed any odor control issues that we were having. You know, with the nitrification, it really cut down on a lot of the odors in the primaries. And improve energy efficiency. We replaced 2 blowers with energy efficient blowers, and then also put in a lot of the VFDs and the computer programming to really run an efficient system. So we wouldn't have to it's just not constant or consistent. It really went with the flow, and also what the data was telling us as far as how much chemicals we need and so forth. So.
As a fun fact, the blowers are the single largest users of energy in our wastewater treatment plant. The need for constant and significant air to keep that dense biological activity going is significant.
And then they were a significant cost as well. They were $1 million each, so yeah, they're pretty impressive. Operations, all right. This was a very successful project. We improved our turbidity, and so the clarity of our secondary effluent to 1 to 3 NTUs. That has a significant impact to our tertiary operations, and because of that is why we're able to do the testing at tertiary right now to see how much we're able to produce. It also obviously improved our flow to our basins, which helps us treat and process equally throughout all of our basins as we take them down for maintenance or as needed.
The turbidity here is on par with what we see from Gibraltar and Cachuma under normal circumstances. So we're getting down to that kind of like water quality, which is exactly what we need for future potable reuse efforts. Mm-hmm.
Another sign of success is water bears. So water bears are, and this is new to me, we've never had water bears at El Estero. And the reason is because we had such a high sludge return rate. We did not, we only had a 2 to 3 days, and now we're trending at 9 to 10 days. And that allows the bacteria to grow and really be resilient. So water bears, basically I think of water bears as in the apocalypse, water bears and cockroaches are gonna survive. You can burn them, you can boil them, you can freeze them, you can starve them, you can zap them with radiation, and I think of them as a roly-poly. They just kind of curl up and hibernate. That's their defense mechanism. And then when they feel safe, they'll just unwiggle and they'll be resilient. But they are found in a sustainable, really sustainable and resilient effluent water now. And so because we have increased our sludge return rate, we're able to produce these water bears in our system. And so this is actually taken from our lab staff. This is our water bear. There's his head, and he's crawling around.
And he's helping to break down our waste.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
He helps us out. And so all of us lab and wastewater nerds are super excited about these kind of things because it's just never happened in El Estero, and it's something that you kind of strive for. It tells you that your process is working and it's hardy.
So what it is it basically more complex bacteria is what we're seeing, and that allows us to treat a more diverse amount of our waste products.
So right now we're optimizing the process. So when you have a big project like this and touches everything, there's little nuances to the project. We're sealing our aeration basin gates. That was in the original design, but we kind of took it out because our operators were a little nervous about going to the new system. They were actually very, very nervous of going to the new system. So they wanted the aeration basins to allow them flexibility of operating. Now that we're in that new system, they're fine with it, and they're okay, and we can seal up the aeration basin gates. We're raising some of our other great gates, and now that we've kind of switched the process, we have some dead end zones. And so we just don't want standing water in there, so we're just going to seal them off and rerouting of some air piping. Another thing that we're kind of going through is seasonal process changing. This is our first year and our first winter, so we got through our summer and it was pretty great. Now we're starting to realize that colder is coming on, so we've extended our SRT days from 8.5 to 10. To kind of move up some of our numbers, and so we're just trying to make small process changes to see what we need to do in the summer versus the winter. So, and that's kind of what we're working with this year. So we'll get a whole season in and see how everything works. Hopefully, get kind of a routine with everything.
So for those who got to watch the video, this is about 10 minutes, but we'll play a small portion of it. We are hoping there's a lot of good video content here and detail. We're hoping to kind of turn this into something a little smaller, more public friendly.
Check right there in the corner on the bottom.
On the bottom.
Oh, there's the right there. Oh, yeah.
So then it's, if you want to pause it, we can.
No, wait. Okay. I wasn't going to show this part anyway, so.
Oh, yeah.
But this will give me.
You can just talk.
Yeah. So I wanted to just kind of go through the construction. So, all of this, those basins were completely clear. We put in all of these new diffusers and put in aerobic and anaerobic zones in our basins, all 6 of them. So that kind of took quite a bit of time. I can't. It is. Nope.
The computer's probably muted.
Oh, get in there. Yeah. So. When we did our final check with the SRF people, they asked that usually you do an end report. They kind of asked her like, well, if you want, you could submit a video or pictures or something that they could submit to their board, because that's probably a little bit more interesting than a report. Mm-hmm. And so I had no problem. I was really excited. We used City TV. And they came up and we wrote a script for them. And so this report is definitely for the SRF and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. But what Josh was saying is we were really excited about this, and we want to, and the process, so we want to kind of make it more user-friendly and really narrow it down to like about 3 minutes. We're currently working on that, and we have to write a whole new script and kind of edit everything else out. So we're hoping to bring that to you probably in about February. And then I got really excited about it, and I want to do that with all of our treatment processes now. And kind of put it on our website because we have the processes broken out. And if instead of just the pictures, if we could do a little snippet, a little video at 2 or 3 minutes, we're hoping to kind of share that in our education program. Our water supply has a great outreach with schools. We give a lot of tours, and to give them kind of a background of the wastewater treatment plant maybe before they come in for their tours. We just really want to get it out there and put out there more education for everyone, not just the technical folks, because this is very much a technical video. But did you find it? Oh, look at that. Thank you.
So we do find that even
within
with
the aeration basins, to use the
DSEL, for
nutrients
example,
to
we've
do a
started
few things.
doing
Create
our tours
energy
now
and
with
synthesize.
a video,
or
like we
create
sit
new
down and we
bugs.
actually talk about
If
quite a
left
bit of it.
unattended, the
It's
bugs
usually
would
like a 20-minute
continuously replicate
conversation,
and
then,
increase their
and then we go
numbers.
across the street and walk through it, and it's easier to point out stuff and have that more. So looking to do something similar here because there is a lot going on, and it's difficult to talk sometimes over
Blowers and
everything else.
equipment.
Yeah.
So, but I just wanted to share that with you and bring it to you and kind of celebrate the team. It took a lot to get to this point, 3 years, and it's pretty exciting, and we're kind of excited. I know that Phil will be presenting on the electrical, but I don't know if you guys ever get a wrap-up of projects. So you always get the beginnings and the problems, and so I want to bring a good story of teamwork and what we've done.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Any questions or comments? I do think you should. Oh, yeah, go ahead. And you should talk to your social media people. That whole wastewater treatment plant versus day spa. Do like an Instagram side by side and let people vote. It would be pretty funny. I think people would get it wrong. You might have to be a little bit careful with the water bear. That one they might get right, but I don't know for sure.
I do. There's some great basin ones that he takes with the sunsets, and I would pick a day spa. I would totally pick it.
Thank you so much.
Chair?
And yes.
I want water bear T-shirts.
That's cute. Or hats. Thank you so much. Next up, contract for design of Elistero electrical distribution renewal project. Mr. Maldonado.
Chair Bernie, commissioners, I asked for this item to be brought to you not on consent but on admin. Given the significance of this project, it's not a very glamorous project per se. But they're very much like the secondary aeration project. This will be significant for Elistero in its impacts, and as we will also talk about at the end, the financing of this has been rather difficult and not as straightforward as we had hoped. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Maldonado to walk you through kind of the project here.
And good morning, Chair Bernie, Commissioner members, Councilmember Snedden. My name is Philip Maldonado. I'm a supervising engineer. I support Water Resources with the design of their capital improvement projects. And so here today to talk a little bit about our upcoming electrical distribution renewal project at our Elistero Water Resources Center. And so, without further ado, why are we presenting today? We're presenting today because staff is recommending moving into the design phase of this project, and to do so, the city will need to use wastewater capital project reserves to support the design contract. This is a necessary project for a critical infrastructure system that supports all of the processes at Elistero. As Ms. Flessy was mentioning, the installation of those blowers take a very significant electrical demand, and that electrical system needs to be consistent just as the blowers themselves need to be consistent, and that's why it's critical. The goal of this project is to eliminate the risk of failure by replacing the aging electrical distribution system infrastructure, improving redundancy, and eliminating single points of failure within the system. So this presentation will provide an overview of the current state of the project, background of the facility, and the work that has been performed to date, and provide a description of the work that is being recommended in order to continue moving this project towards completion. So our final design phase, that's where we're moving into. And for the final design phase, to move forward, staff recommends Brown and Caldwell to continue their work that has been performed supporting preliminary design. So why Brown and Caldwell? They are an experienced firm with a strong electrical team. Brown and Caldwell was selected through a request for proposals process that received 3 proposals. 2 firms were actually interviewed, and a professional services agreement for preliminary design was awarded in August of 2018. Their proposal provided a detailed path forward, and their interview showed strong alignment with project objectives. They also showed the greatest understanding of the overall project requirements. And to date, their performance has been strong. They have performed well through preliminary design as well as on previous projects for the city. And they have shown a strong ability to work in collaboration with city staff, which is something we always look for. So where are we at now? The preliminary design is complete. You look at the diagram there, and all arrows point down to the bottom, which is the culmination of in a preliminary design report. As indicated in this image, the objective of this work is to replace the electrical distribution system, including identifying needed stormwater improvements and permit requirements, allowing for continued functionality for at least the next 25 years. In addition, staff needed to develop an approach to better optimize staffing conditions and site circulation by assessing the administration and storage facilities layout. The preliminary design included 16 workshops, 7 technical memorandums, and with a final deliverable of a preliminary design report, along with a final design for the waste gas flare, along with providing the needed documentation for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund application. So all of that kind of came together. And that preliminary design report is sufficient for environmental and coastal development submittals as well. And so that's put us in a good place to continue moving forward. The administrative planning portion of work was delayed, but sufficient information was detailed to support the preliminary design report. And this planning approach, the planning approach for the administration building will be completed by February 2020. So just an add-on that'll help us for the future. And of course, this preliminary design report provides the foundation for the final design. And at this point, the city is ready to move forward with the design phase. So some background on this facility and the need for this project. The existing electrical distribution system and substations are all original 1970s construction, except, of course, for the secondary process, which was just upgraded. It's past the end of their useful life and are susceptible to catastrophic failure. The electrical system supports all of the other systems within the facility. The critical nature of this system, combined with the risk of failure, continues to make this work the highest priority for maintaining the facility. The project focuses on the main power feed and distribution panel, 5 substations and feed lines, and connecting equipment. And you can see how the existing facility there in that image encompasses the entirety of the facility. Some of the key objectives in preliminary design were to evaluate the electrical system alternatives, minimize risk of unknown utilities, maintain operations, and minimize disruptions to the process with the replacement of this infrastructure. This was accomplished through the development of 3 key technical memorandums. The first was a load analysis. The second for a power distribution system alternatives analysis. This included consideration of construction sequencing, and a third for sub-metering analysis. There are also 4 additional supporting tech memos that helped inform project scope decisions. These were the waste gas flare evaluation, cogen analysis, administration planning, and stormwater compliance. And we'll discuss each of these in the next few slides. So first, the load analysis. The load analysis reviewed all of the existing facility needs and estimated Future needs. The analysis determined that there is sufficient power supply to meet anticipated future needs, and replacement of the main distribution panel and all substations in the distribution system is required. And a second main power feed can be incorporated into the design to eliminate a critical single point of failure.
Is this where alternative renewable energies were also considered?
Absolutely. And so part of replacing the primary power feed is allowing for opening the system up to additional feeds to support additional renewable energy. So the next tech memo, the power distribution system alternatives analysis. Several alternatives were analyzed for this. A parallel routing scheme was selected to allow for installation while maintaining functionality of the existing system. The 5 existing substations will be reduced down to 3, and the replacement power feed and main distribution panels will be installed in parallel, and some of the existing components will remain, and that's how we will eliminate those single points of failures at those points. The submetering analysis, the submetering analysis evaluated the monitoring needs to better manage the electrical distribution system efficiency. The analysis recommended monitoring all major subsystems along with the main power feeds, and this recommendation will be incorporated into the final design. It's just for greater efficiency and control over the system.
This will be really helpful in being able to identify potential problems as they start to sneak up on us. Maybe if something's backflushing or having to, I don't know, potential issues coming. So I think having this submetering will be really helpful.
Yep. Next, the waste gas flare. Gas production at this facility is dependent upon a capacity and available source material for the process and infrastructure to manage both gas and electrical systems. The flare evaluation reviewed each of these components to help guide decision making. The evaluation found that new facilities are required to produce additional gas. The existing flare is near its capacity for the anticipated peak gas production. So the design recommendation for this facility is to add a second low NOx flare in parallel with the existing flare. This will expand the capacity of the flare system and allow for replacement of the existing flare as gas production increases with future facility changes. The cogeneration analysis. So as discussed, as just mentioned, the current infrastructure needs to expand for additional gas production. So this tech memo evaluated what infrastructure is needed to accept additional process material at this facility. This included alternatives using 3 digesters and alternatives using 4 digesters to process materials. Each alternative added a significant capital cost with minimal annual savings. This analysis showed that major expansion is not viable at this time. The current facility plan is to install a 3rd digester with future demands and funding. So the electrical system is planned for design with this future expansion in mind. And so that being said, the assessment will remain as a good planning tool for future needs as they are considered. Stormwater compliance. This tech memo reviewed and outlined approaches to meeting the needed stormwater improvements required by a project of this type. The city's consultant reviewed existing regulations, compared past applications the city has installed with other agency projects, and developed conceptual applications to meet the needs of this project. And so at this point, the design team has good direction for installing infrastructure to meet the permit requirements for best management practices. Yes, sir. What is that? That's soon to be a bioretention basin. It was one that was installed with the secondary improvements. Again, may not be that intuitive. You're doing work on a core part of the process, but there are these additional requirements that this facility has in order to manage stormwater. And so when you do improvements like this, that is necessary.
For the most part, all surfaces within El Estero flow to the headworks. So it's kind of whether you get tracking of material on site, it all goes back to the headworks for treatment.
And so administration planning. This tech memo evaluated all stakeholder needs at the facility, calculated storage requirements. We presented alternatives to supporting decision making. And we found that the costs of expansive renovations quickly outpaced planned budget. Therefore, direction was given to constrain the scope within the existing building footprints. This constrained scope is what's being finalized now, but has already informed the electrical project sufficiently to move forward. And so the final administration project in totality will be planned with future budgets. It's being programmed with future budgets, so it's not part of the electrical final design. So speaking of electrical final design, what are we doing for the final design? Final design is going to focus on generating plans for replacing the existing electrical distribution system. It will eliminate those critical points of failure within the system. It'll allow for the increased cogen power production and other future power sources, as Joshua was mentioning, when they become available. And so that's encompassed in the plan. What does the project timeline look like? This is where we're currently at, right here with the final design, which is highlighted. The gap between final design and construction is to allow for award of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan after final design has been completed. As we are submitting an application for the SRF loan this year, but in anticipation that it may not be at the level that is acceptable for the state, we will gain more points when we are near final design.
So I just wanted to add one of the things before we kicked off this project, given the choreograted dance that needs to happen to make this happen, we are kind of frustrated by our bidding process. I think in an ideal world with the complexity of this project, I would like to have brought the contractor on during final design so that they are part of that whole dialogue as we kind of go through it. And unfortunately, our municipal code, our charter kind of restricts us from doing kind of a process like that, which is unfortunate, but kind of adds, I think, more, because you can put all this great information in a spec, but being able to transfer that to a contractor, it's tough. I mean, I expect this is several volumes of specifications and drawings. It's being really complicated, and so I think that's where our construction management team is really going to need to shine on this, is being able to, again, because this is a partnership, being able to help the contractor be successful by helping him to digest all the information that's in our contract documents. Because I think in a perfect world, you'd want the contractor there side by side as you designed this, so that you can kind of work through some of these staging issues, because we're certainly going to have a lot of coordination challenges.
Absolutely. And so this is what the final design timeline looks like. As you can see, we'll be at or near 90% design by the end of the calendar year, which is exactly where we need for the SRF loan application. We do have a good length of time to incorporate a lot of the construction management coordination that Joshua was talking about, and make sure that gets inputted into the design as best as we can without actually having a contractor involved in the process. And here's what the costs look like. If you had a chance to look at the draft council report that is linked or that is added in the packet, the costs were highlighted because those were budgetary numbers. These are the actual numbers that will be put into the contract. And you'll see the bolded items there are the cost for final design, both consultant cost and staff cost. And here is the estimated construction costs and total project costs that we currently have. This is drawn directly from the preliminary design report that we've just recently finished. And as you can see, total project cost nearing that $30 million mark, slightly exceeding that $30 million mark, putting it on par with the secondary project that was just done. And so for project financing, like I'd mentioned earlier, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund is the preferred source, and it is the avenue of funding that we are pursuing. It comes at the lowest cost for the ratepayers, but it is not the only way to fund this project. There are municipal bonds that could be pursued in order to do that. And the current interim use of capital project reserves is to complete that final design.
So let me just take a break here. This is the part that when we initially started this project, we knew we wanted to get it going, and so we funded the preliminary design, which is like the $1.5 million to get this rolling using we call PAYGO funding, available capital funding to do that. But we had anticipated that we would have a state revolving fund loan to help fund this final design and then into construction. And unfortunately, I think we've had some discussion on this, but the challenge is the Clean Water, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan is impacted. There are just too much demand for that money and not enough funds there. The state has done a great job, and the feds have done a great job funding the drinking water side. There's no line there. Like if we had a project, we could get that money in a year, which is great. But they unfortunately haven't really kept up with demands for this, and to that end, there is a waiting list of sorts and a priority to get it. And we did apply last year and fell short of the points that we needed, and part of it was they wanted to see us further along in our design before they were to provide us funding. And so we've gone back and forth with them over the last year, and they're like, you really need to finish final design in order to get the points that you're going to need to get funded. And so that put us in this catch-22 of what do we do? And so we are recommending to move forward with the use of capital reserves. So this is going to take us below council's policy on our reserves, and it eventually gets us down pretty low. We carry about was it $9 million in reserves. $4.5 million of that is what's called capital reserves, and so we are anticipating drawing all $4.5 million, close to, which basically wipes out our capital reserves. Not a comfortable place I like to be in, but I feel like we have very little choice. We have a ongoing capital program of about $4.5 million. So worst case scenario, we could, in theory, slow parts of our ongoing capital. I don't think we're ready to make that decision or make that call right now, but that is kind of a backup plan. But I think that's kind of where we are today, and we are going to apply again. Our application's due by the end of the year, hoping to get funding again, but I just don't think we're going to rank high enough because we're not far enough with the final design. So in a nutshell, that's kind of where we are. Municipal bonds are an option, but the interest rates on municipal bonds are considerably higher. And so we're, again, if something happens and we are unable to get a state revolving fund loan, that could be our backup as well. But our current rate structure and proposed rates that we've recently adopted are insufficient to handle a municipal bond approach. So that's where we are today. I don't know if Ms. Leslie has anything to add.
I want to just expand on the SRF point system. So we applied last year and we received 9. The breaking point last year was 12. So we were significantly lower. So we've been working with the State Revolving Fund team and asking how we can build that up. Today we anticipate 11, 12, so we're right on that border, but we don't know where their line is. We don't know if it's going to be 12 or 13. Once we finish the final design, we'll be at 16, so we'll be well above, hopefully, the cut line. So that's kind of where we're at. That's why we're going to go ahead and apply this year. buy some lottery tickets and cross our fingers. But if not, we are budgeting on the worst case of us being final design.
Perfect.
Dr. Keller.
Yes. Thank you for a very nice presentation. Challenging issue. In terms of sea level rise and how we think about where to site this, and thinking about that and whether that could give us points by saying, if we take that into consideration in the final design and we're already thinking about that and it's a requirement by the state board to think about sea level rise, could that be something where we could gain by saying we're going to do it and it's part of our thinking? No?
No. So that doesn't get us any points. That's just mandatory.
Okay.
You have to, now the whole state is sea level rise. It just needs to be in your documents, period.
Mm-hmm. And the planning horizon for the investment we're going to make is about a 25-year investment, which at this point we don't anticipate sea level rise impacting the facility in that horizon, that timing horizon. So, but there are things that I'm sure will be done to harden the electrical facilities on site. Yeah.
And then alternative energy additional to the cogen in terms of solar or anything that could be placed that may also, does that play into the point system at all?
No.
That doesn't play into the point system, but it is definitely in our design, and that plays into our overall city goals of renewable energy.
And whether the state has other monies that could be used for that could help for this project.
We are researching that, and we just brought someone on board to help us research more of grants and loans, and specifically for those ones we're missing out on.
Another one of those catches, I think if our electrical system had failed and we have violated our permit, we would get extra points. Yeah, right. I'm like, that's.
Well, I'm actually kind of working.
You're working that angle.
I am, because we have done workarounds so we don't violate and fail. We have work orders, and we have had one violation a few years ago because the electrical system failed, but we have since then done workarounds and patchwork until that happens. And so I'm trying to get us as many points as possible to get us to that level. So I am grasping at straws for this year. Hopefully next year I won't need to.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the main driver is the critical need. In order to keep the facility running, maintain our permit, this system does need to be replaced. Just like like Ms. Flessy mentioned in her presentation, these parts are not readily available. They need to be continuously operating, and it is getting more and more difficult as we move forward. And so that's why it's critical that we continue to move forward. And so that brings me to our recommendation. We are asking for support in our recommendation for issuing a contract with Brown Caldwell for the design services, as well as drawing from the Wastewater Capital Reserves Fund in order to do so. So in summary, as I just mentioned, we want to move forward with the final design. It's a priority project. It's addressing a critical system with increasing risks. The timeline can be reasonably maintained, and the costs are anticipated to be captured with that Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So with that, any other questions? Thank you for your time.
Oh, just had one last question. If we apply for get the SRF loan in 2021, would we apply for the full $30 million, or?
Yeah, we plan to do the whole $30 million. And what happens when we get this loan, and that's why we're going to dip into reserves. But once we get the loan, we can immediately turn around and submit for reimbursement on the preliminary and final design costs, which we'll get back and replenish reserves. So that's kind of the mindset there on digging back out of that hole.
Just minor question. I had questions on the question of the administrative elements here, which when in the report I didn't understand it, but in your presentation I totally understand it. So my suggestion, just a suggestion, is on page 2 in that paragraph. You might clarify that as you did here today before it goes to council. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that feedback.
Go ahead.
Just keep going. Just had a question on your comment on the challenge of having to carve out 2 RFPs, split up the projects, so to speak, rather than involving the eventual contractor now, rather than. So I get where that makes a better project, but does that also translate to the construction contractor charging you less because they were involved earlier? Is there some savings, efficiencies that would be involved with that too?
The mechanism is called a CM at risk, or contractor at risk is the mechanism that some special districts and others can use, in which you basically sit down and it's open book pricing. So the contractor is showing you what his profit is showing you what all the work is costing. And that's kind of how you, at the end of the day, they're involved. You pay them to be involved in the final design and to give you input. And at the end of the day, they show you what they're going to charge you, what their profit is. And if you don't like their cost, then you can go out, in theory, you can go out and hire somebody else to do the work. But the idea is that they've been along with you and they now understand exactly what this project's about. And they've shown you what their profit is, and you continue on with that contract.
They're in a sense giving you a price knowing more earlier than they do when they're just looking at what you're going to give them now. Right. And in a perfect world, that would save money. Right?
Right. I think I think at the end of the day, you'll probably end up in the same place. But construction, you may avoid violations, and construction would go a lot smoother. Because I think the challenge is a contractor just looking at, say, for example, having 30 days or 45 days to review this is going to go in through and try and put together a quote. And what he doesn't understand completely, he pads. And then on the other side, this contractor's been along and he knows exactly how much work this is. And so it's more detail, but in areas it may be more because he knows it's going to take a lot longer. So I think at the end of the day, the pricing, I'm not expecting it to be a cost savings or so, but I expect that the project would go smoother. And I unfortunately, we're unable to accommodate that in our current.
I'll make a note.
Charter.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have just a quick, just two things. One, a quick comment of appreciation of the One Water logo that's up there now. That's beautiful, and it's nice to see that and starting to integrate that in. And then just maybe a consideration if there might be a recommendation to council to consider design build bids or some change that might accommodate these very specialized water projects that are, we have quite a few of them, and I won't make a recommendation at this point, but if it might be, I see our Mr. Henschke.
If I may, Honorable Chair, members of the Commission, the contracting method that Mr. Hagemark is talking about is not permitted under our charter. So if we are going to be using this kind of a methodology for a new construction project, then we have to go through a charter amendment. Design build is a fundamentally different kind of procurement methodology. You could use the design build, but you've already invested heavily in the design of this project. There are methods by which you can get feedback during the bidding process on constructability and doing the constructability and analysis. So those are available under your current methodologies for procurement. So before we start changing all of the methods by which we procure public contracts here in the city, we need to consider how that would actually be implemented and whether it's feasible within the time frame with which you want to bid this project.
Thank you. Okay. Do I have a motion?
Motion to staff recommendation.
Second. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries. Thanks so much. Okay. We are 1 minute before 11. Sea level rise. Is there anything new, or can we hold that until December?
Oh, you can hold it until January.
Okay.
Which is when we will
The report's going to get released in January, but in 30 seconds, the committee basically is getting briefed on what's coming, and on a 30,000-foot level to some degree, with the technical details to be released in January.
Great. Perfect. January then. On to the manager's report. Dakota, Joshua, and I sat down last week and dug through the old report, and we've both narrowed it down and expanded it. There's quite a few pieces that will start coming back to us either on a biannual or a as needed basis. So we took quite a few things out that we didn't feel like we needed to see every single month unless something goes, very, very different. So you're going to see a couple things in here, though, that we did leave because we did do this water supply report. For example, the groundwater levels we left in here for this month, but in future months we're not actually going to see that until we until that biannual thing. So just a heads up, and I'll turn it over for Joshua for the rest of it.
Thank you. We haven't been able to implement all the changes, but the Gibraltar rainfall data, we're planning to do that twice a year. We're going to do that in November and May. Gibraltar Reservoir, November and May. The groundwater levels, November and May. Those are kind of the times when we're really sitting down and diving into those issues. And then some of these graphics, we made some enhancements. And on the last one, we're continuing to tweak this, but this is the recycled water production. And one of the things that we hope to add in early 2020 will be what is the capacity, so a dotted line showing the capacity of the facility. So it gives the council and the public a sense of what kind of unused capacity is in this facility because of the cyclical nature of recycled water, and in the case of potable reuse, what that would open, those doors that could be opened there. So with that, there's also some new graphics that you'll hopefully see in December related to wastewater. We wanted to highlight a new graphic highlighting volumes treated with the capacity of what El Estero, and then spills, both public and private spills, to kind of show that we've got a significant problem with private spills. We've gotten the public spills, I think, roughly under control. We're still standing at 3. We also wanted to talk about slip workload, and since that's a big topic for the commission right now, kind of put it on here how we're doing as regards to all the slip activity that's going on. And then on some interval, checking in on performance indicators with El Estero, such as production, electrical production, gas production, things of that. I think the commission would be interested in, not on a monthly basis, but on some type of regular check-in biannually or something. So with that, I did want to add, we will be coming back at some point to talk a little bit more about the private lateral repair funding. We do believe, after some good input from Commissioner Jordan and Davis, there may be an opportunity with CDBG. Right now, we're still trying to figure out how you would administer such a program, but more to come on that. And then I wanted to check on attendance for December. Commissioner Arturo sounds like he won't be here, but just want to see if there's anybody else who may have a conflict. Okay. And then last, I want to recognize that this is Jennifer's last meeting. Would you please? So it is with the utmost sadness that I have to report that Jennifer is moving closer to her family in Utah, and that we want to recognize her service to the Water Commission and to me specifically. For those who don't know, Jennifer has a passion for the written word. She loves, you give her a document to tear apart and she loves it. I've never seen anything like it. She gets the utmost enjoyment from it. And she's also very passionate about public service. She has really enjoyed working with all of you and really gets into the issues that we're trying to tackle here on the Water Commission, and I just really appreciate it. She takes a lot of pride in her work, and she will be dearly missed. And I wish her all the best, and if something doesn't work out, you're always welcome to come back. So with that, I turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you so very much. You will be missed, but we wish you the best in Utah, and come visit at least. Okay. Maybe not during a meeting, maybe after the meeting. Okay. With that, we will close the meeting. Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course.
I I just wanted to mention that this week for the water department was a really big outreach week with City College. So we had Trace Martin come to our industry mixer, and he was such an excellent inspiration for students to consider employment in the water department. And then also yesterday, Kathy Taylor, Carson Woolert, and Mariana Cruz came to my environmental geology class and gave a full over hour-long presentation on our water supplies, where they come from, employment opportunities, and it was really excellent outreach, over 70 students, and they were really excited, and she advertised job openings, and it was great. I just wanted to give a special appreciation for that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.